Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be able to share a little bit about my grandmother with you today. We grew up in rural Nebraska listening to country music, and there's a song by Brad Paisley about, I hope I'm at least half the dad that he didn't have to be. It's about the child of a single mother whose stepdad raises him as his own. This song has probably always resonated so much with me because I can draw parallels to it in my own life. My parents got divorced when I was 5. My mom packed my sister and I up in the middle of the night one night, and when my dad was away, and drove us across the country to Arizona. My mom was only 23 years old at this time, with 5 and 6-year-old daughters, and I cried a lot for my dad. I just couldn't wrap my little brain around why I couldn't have both my parents. And then my mom did something that forever changed my life. She kept my sister, but shipped me halfway across the country to be raised by my dad. I didn't realize it until I was older, but between my sister and I was the lucky one. My dad is a simple man, but a very good one, and he didn't become that way on accident. He was raised by one of the kindest, most caring and beautiful humans that has ever existed. Her name was Lucille, and she will always be my hero. My grandmother was never famous. She didn't have a high-powered job, and she never broke any records. She was a lunch lady in my elementary school, and sometimes she cleaned hotel rooms or a local church to make some extra money. When we needed school clothes and couldn't afford them, we went outside and picked marigold seeds off her marigolds and sold them for 25 cents a bag. She also made and sold corn bags to keep people warm through the winter months. Not wanting to be greedy, she sold them for $5 and $6 a piece, even though several customers who came to buy from her tried to pay her more because they thought she was charging too little. And she helped my father raise me. She was the opposite of my mother. The woman who gave me life was very young and not that interested in investing in her children. She wanted to lead her own life, and to be honest, my sister and I were in the way and a reminder of my father, who she was never happy with. My grandmother, on the other hand, was much older. She had raised 5 children of her own. Her pregnancy with my father had been a big surprise. She was in her mid-40s when it happened, and her doctor had initially thought my dad was a tumor. He decided to run a pregnancy test before operating just in case, and they were all surprised to find out she was pregnant. My dad is about 14 years younger than his next youngest sibling, which meant my grandmother was in her mid-60s when I was born and nearly 70 years old when my parents divorced. When my mom sent me back to live with my dad, he was living with my grandmother. She quickly set up a cot in her spare bedroom so I could sleep next to my dad. She dug out the few toys she had and welcomed me with open arms and all the love a confused, grieving child could need. To her, I would never be a burden. My grandmother taught me so much about unconditional love, compassion, and caring for others. I truly believe that almost all the positive characteristics I possess came from my grandma Lucille. She truly lived by the golden rule of treat others the way you want to be treated, and the idea that if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. I never heard her say an unkind word to anyone or about anyone. When I was in 2nd grade and we had a new student in school who didn't speak English, she encouraged me to become friends and play with the girl to help her feel welcome. I also remember my dad trying to get her to turn off the news at one point when there was a famine somewhere in the world. I don't even remember where it was, but she would just spend hours laying awake at night, worried about all those starving people and feeling so helpless, but wanting to help somehow. And she did help where she could. She didn't have money to donate, and she certainly couldn't travel anywhere to do humanitarian work, but she did like to sew. And when she found out about an organization sewing quilts and large cloth bags for foster kids so they didn't have to move their belongings in trash bags, she immediately got involved. She would spend hours making quilt tops after having my father or I thread the needle on her sewing machine because she couldn't see well enough to do it herself. She didn't expect any recognition for this work, and she never met any of the kids who received the quilts she helped make. Just doing something, anything, to help these kids feel cared for was enough for her. I only saw my grandmother lose her temper twice, and one of these times was related to making these quilts. She had one sister who had married into money and had more money than she needed to live comfortably. This sister also sewed, and my grandmother asked her sister to donate some material to make the quilts and bags with. My grandmother didn't ask her to go and purchase the material, just dig through what she already had and pull out what she wasn't using. Her sister refused, and my grandmother was very disappointed and angry. She felt that her sister was being selfish and did not hesitate to tell her so. Her sister never did donate any fabric, and I'm pretty sure my grandma put an extra hour sewing to work through her anger. The name Lucille means light, and my grandmother shone with one of the brightest lights of love that I have ever seen. She died about 9 years before my daughter was born, but I knew I would give my child this name because I want my Lucy to have something to aspire to. And if my child grows up To be like her great-grandmother, a simple woman, content that she has enough and has compassion to help others, I will know I have succeeded as a parent. I teach comprehensive sex education at Bridger Care now. I didn't fall into this job accidentally, and I'm so passionate about it because of my own childhood experiences. I try to be neutral when I tell classes of high school students that 45% of pregnancies are unplanned, but that while nearly half the kids in the class are likely whoopsies babies, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're unwanted or unloved, just unexpected. And this is true. But also, I teach sex education because I want teens and adults alike to have the power to decide if and when to have children. Because all children deserve to be wanted and loved unconditionally, like my grandmother did for me, even though she didn't have to. And for my little Lucille, I just hope I'm half the mom that my grandmother didn't have to be.
In a few weeks, I have just calculated that I'll have known my mother, Helen Hohmann, for 61 years. Wow, 61 years of being nurtured, being inspired, being exasperated, being amazed, being annoyed, and being taught by Helen Hohmann. People who have gotten to know me and have met me alongside my mom always say, "You're so close. You have this most interesting, complicated relationship with your mother. You love your mother so much, and it's so obvious." And I just say my stock line, which I've developed over time, which is, we've had our moments. It just sums up so much. And so this morning, I'd like to share a couple of those moments. And as my mother always told me, this will hurt me more than it hurts you. Pretty recently, I visited my mother. She's living in her home in Minneapolis. It's the same home where I was raised. She's living independently, which is a really beautiful thing at her age. She's turning 96 in September. And I walked through the door. Now, I have some curly hair. That's just the way I was born. I walked through the door and she took one look at me and she said, "You know, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but they're wearing the styles a lot more smooth and straight these days." Well, a couple of months went by, visited her again. And before I went there, I took that hot iron and the blow dryer and I went hard on my hair. I walked into the house and she took a look at me and she said, "Oh my God, Kathryn, what have you done to your wonderful curls?" It was just one of those moments. I always had to be a step ahead of my mom. And as a kid, we all have those moments where we're deeply bored. And every once in a while, I'd let out this sigh and say, "I'm bored." And she would say the same thing every time to me and all my siblings. Ever to say you're bored means you have no inner resources. So I went to work and I got some inner resources. Which brings me to the topic of spirituality, which was kind of a stumbling block between me and my mother and my father, my mom and my father and his children, all through our lives. My mother was rejected Catholic. She was born Catholic and decided that wasn't for her. My father was a German Lutheran, and their compromise was to become Episcopalians and raise their children as Episcopalians, which my mother described as Catholics without the Pope. My mother signed up and threw herself into Episcopalianism, and she was the religious education instructor at our church. She would teach the kids, and I was one of those kids, and we would do day long, and then we'd break for lunch, and she would enlist everybody in the cooking. Well, one day I was on Rice Krispie bar duty, which I'm sure you all know the recipe. Melt the marshmallows, stir in the Rice Krispies, and then cool for a period of time. So I threw open the refrigerator in the church kitchen and everything was full and the clock was ticking. And I thought, where are we going to cool these down? Well, it was a very cold Minnesota afternoon. And I looked over and there are the windows with the Jack Frost frozen outside. And I thought, folks, and I turned to all my friends, have I got a great idea? We can cool these right here on the windows. So we went to work smearing the Rice Krispie on the windows. And I think it's accurate, even with the benefit of time, to say that all hell broke loose. my friends and I all found ourselves in Father Henderson's office getting a talking to. Well, at the end of the long day, my mother was carpooling all of us home, and sitting behind the wheel, I was in the front seat, and she finally said, well, what happened in the father's office? And Allison, my best friend, piped up from behind the seat in the back and said, we had to learn about original sin. And I could see my mother's jaw go stiff and her hands clench on the steering wheel. And she said, oh, you did you? Well, she waited until all of the kids were dropped off and safely home. And then she stopped by the side of the road and she said to me, make no mistake, I don't swallow all of this religion nonsense. From my perspective, a lot of it is just a heavy dose of crap. I remember feeling like my head was going to explode on that day. Coming back from a religious education class, hearing my mother say these words left me confused, alone, and really adrift. And I remember years later, over time, having a continuing set of discussions where she said, you have to have your own search. You have to figure out what your own meaning is. In a very profound sense that when I found the Unitarian Universalist perspective, I knew that I could conduct a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I felt that that was something that my mother was guiding me to do in her own way. There were other moments, of course. One in college, I was unfocused and bored a lot of the time, taking a boring class from a boring professor in literature. As I left one day, I called my mom and she said, you might want to look into the poems of John Berryman. And she suggested that I read Dream Song 14. It goes like this in part. Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. My mother told me as a boy, repeatedly, ever to confess you're bored means you have no inner resources. Yet now I conclude that I have no inner resources because I am heavy bored. Peoples bore me. Literature bores me, especially great literature. Reading that, I realized there was Mom over my shoulder, taking a literature class from a boring professor who urged me to read a poem about never admitting you're bored. Mom was always there. Later, as I moved to Washington, D.C., I became a lobbyist and experimented with many different religions. Talking to my mother one day over the phone, she related a story. She was in her own mom's house and it was around sunset time and she walked up to the attic to find something. She was facing the street and she couldn't find the light switch. She was fumbling for the chain. And just then, through the crack between the shutters, the light was pouring in. And she heard this sound. It started slow and small and then grew louder. And she realized it was singing, but it was not any time for anyone to have been gathered. There was no one outside or inside the house. She said she heard the loveliest of voices. It was perfect in tone and tune. And she said, at that point, I knew something, that this moment had changed everything and yet changed nothing at all. She said, I believed I heard the angels singing. From then on, I had my faith. I didn't necessarily have a religion of any kind, but I had my way, and I knew I could follow my way. Our relationship changed as a result of that talk and others we had over time. So I wasn't too surprised when I visited her and I walked into her own kitchen and I saw on the refrigerator that she had taped up a poem. It's actually part of a song that I had sent her from Leonard Cohen. And it goes like this. The birds they sang at break of day. Start again, I heard them say. Don't dwell on what has passed away or what is yet to come. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
I'm here with my mother and my son from Anchorage, and I decided to go live today, but then I had to cry all through Cami's talk and laugh all through Kathryn. So I hope I can pull it together here. I do want to say that Cami, I believe, is the head of our caring committee for UU. And she herself and her committee got organized to show up for me and my mom when we had COVID in December. So thank you. Okay, we'll get back to the easier part. We hijacked my mom this morning. We told her that she was going off to Catholic Mass at 10, and then at the last minute, told her that I was going to give a talk and she needed to stay and listen. So I'm just going to share a couple of my favorite childhood memories about mom. My dad, when I was a kid, my dad asked to go to management school for a month in Idaho. And my parents decided that we would all go down and my mom would camp with us for the month while dad was taking classes. My dad wanted to ride his bike from Moscow or from Missoula down to Moscow, Idaho. So mom, it took him 2 days to do that. And mom hooked up our camping trailer behind our station wagon and loaded all 6 kids, ages 2 through 12, and drove us down, followed dad down. And then for a month, she set up camp for us in the state campground. And we had the time of our lives, and it's still some of our best childhood memories. Every day it was just getting meals for all of us, making sure we were having fun in the woods and down by the creek, and taking care of the little kids, making sure they were safe and having fun. And away from all the distractions of the telephone and shopping and the neighbors, it was glorious to have our mom to herself in her take charge outdoor mode. It was just wonderful. And a year later, we got another similar experience. Mom was the best Girl Scout leader in the state of Montana, I'm sure. And we went on outdoor adventures overnight, biking, camping. And the greatest one was a trip she organized with a Girl Scout troop, an exchange program with a Girl Scout troop from Wisconsin. So those girls came out one summer and went to Dude Ranch in Montana experience. And then we all got on the train in Libby and went back to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota and did a several-day canoeing trip. And mom had roped her closest friends into being Girl Scout leaders too, whether they liked camping or not. And so she was always surrounded by her other best friend leaders. And we got to camp, we got to this Boundary Waters canoe camp, and this, along with the many regular challenges of getting a bunch of girls to canoe around in the Boundary Waters, like carrying those canoes on our heads across islands, or 80-pound unframed packs. The mosquitoes, 2 of the girls were allergic and their faces swelled up like balloons. But the night before, like the second to last day of the adventure, we had torrential rainstorms and sheet lightning across the sky. Everything in camp was completely soaked. Our air mattresses were literally floating in the back of the tents. And we got up the next day, and the young men guides were scared to death to take us back to the established camp, because they've been told their summer employment depended on them never bringing a group back to camp until their trip was over. And my mom said, no, we're going back to camp. The girls don't have anything dry to sleep in tonight, and we're heading back. And we did. And we were at that age where it was exactly the kind of adventure and challenge and excitement and contact with the wilderness that lit us up. And I've carried all of that into my adulthood. I have found to go unafraid of planning big adventures like that, and being in the wilderness is where I have found myself and where I've realized what my real desires in life are. And that all came because my mom was unafraid of the work involved in doing those kind of adventures. So I'm here with we're blessed with my son from Anchorage, spending Mother's Day week with us. I believe my other son and his wife are on the Zoom call too. And I want to introduce my son, Chuck. He's becoming a father this year for the first time as well. And he's going to say goodbye to everybody. And I'm going to make my mom get in the picture too.
Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you and great to be here. I'm really grateful to have these two here with me, my mom and grandma. Grateful for vaccines that allow me to be here, and just really, really excited that in a few months, my mom's going to be a grandma and she gets to take out a new grandbaby on adventures with hopefully fewer mosquitoes, but we're in Alaska, so probably lots of mosquitoes. It was great to meet everybody.
Okay, thank you.